Okay, we are really, as you know, it's kind of, I can say this is episode 7 rather than lecture number 7 because isn't it true it's one long continuous movie? Because the events, as I've said a number of occasions, of facts are so remarkable that they always make me wonder why people waste their time with fiction. Um, when I last, when we last met our hero, as it were, April 1, 1948. So I took you last time from December, January, February, March of 47, 48, excuse me. The Jews and the Arabs are in high tension because there's 6 weeks to go before the British are scheduled to leave. The UN vote of the General Assembly said that it's going to be partition, and the British on their own said they're leaving by May 15. And so the UN vote, coordinated with that. And if the British are really going to go, which no one believed they actually would do, they did not know, people did not realize that they're beginning of what they call the post-colonial period, when the British and the French and the Belgians and others like that would actually leave their colonies. No one ever thought of this happening, and you and I, of course, know with hindsight that it took place all over the world. And the Jews and the Arabs, I repeat, the Jews and the Arabs didn't believe the British were really going to. It's a trick. But as the months went by, December, January, February, March, it's from 100,000 British soldiers to 27,000. I said, well, it's really happening. And, they're really going. Now, both sides, the Jews and the Palestinians, were thinking about what's going to happen after May 15th. I mean, that's the point. Till then, the teacher's there, and then, the principal, the teacher, leaves the school. But the Arabs are thinking in terms of what they regard as a friendly invasion, right? A friendly invasion by the Arab states. After all, they're going to rescue their fellow Arabs. And as you'll see, it's not that far from the truth. Because the Palestinians, I repeat, the Palestinians will be on the ropes, especially after I finish tonight. Well, it's a fact, it's not funny. And so the Arabs now are rushing to get weapons. Because if it's really British really leaving, and it's really going to be an Arab incursion or invasion or whatever you want to call it into Palestine, that's a war. A war, you need a lot of weapons, money, things that they actually weren't prepared for. How old is Syria in 1948, or Lebanon? 2 years old? You see what I'm saying? Brand new. It's not even countries. They're conglomerations of different groups. Iraq and Egypt are older, but not big armies. British never let them have big armies. I don't blame the British. They never were wealthy in that sense. And the results are that they're in a rush. Now, Iraq, Baruch Hashem, from then till today, the Arabs have been our best friends and their own worst enemy. The Iraqi government in those years, for many years, was run by a guy named Nouri Pasha. And he was a friend of England. And he had negotiated in 1946 and 47 an Anglo-Iraqi treaty. And under that, the British were going to give the Iraqis a lot of weapons as a sign of a maturing relationship. It's not a colony exactly anymore. But fortunately, the treaty contained certain clauses which allowed the British to still have some oil rights and an air base or something like in Iraq. And so in February of 1948, the Iraqi people rioted like crazy, something we're not unfamiliar with today, and went nuts and burned down the British embassy and things like this. And so the treaty, in other words, Nouri Pasha had to flee the country and the treaty never was ratified, and so they didn't get the weapons. They were their own worst enemies. Abdullah, the king of Jordan, who we'll meet, he does get weapons. He's the only one that plays ball totally with the British, and it makes him very cocky. Back around the time, just before the UN vote, he had secret meetings with Golda Meir. Golda Meir said at that time, not because he loved Golda Meir, but because he knows the Jews are in Palestine, and he wanted to do a deal. Let's get a couple pictures here. All right. This, of course, is Golda when she's older. Back in the 1940s, she was younger, and but that's Abdullah, all right. And he had negotiated a deal in which basically said like this: the British will leave, there's a partition, I'll take over the Arab parts, you keep the Jewish parts. At that time, the Jews thought that's a good deal. I'm talking about in October, something like that, of 47. And the basic idea is we'll be allies in some sense or another. Now, the Jews were self-delusional, but that's the way they were talking. And the key point is that the Jews and Abdullah both hate the Mufti. If you wish, they both hate the Palestinian nationalists, because the Palestinian nationalists would like to kill Abdullah and take over Jordan as they would today. And so, the enemy of my friend, isn't that right? The point, though, is that we saw last week that the Jewish situation started to deteriorate in many ways. They were choking off Jerusalem, the kibbutzim in the north. The Jews in January, February, March did not really look like they're getting their act together. That only has the effect of making the Arabs more arrogant and cocky and sure. And so the Arab street, as we call it, the mobs, figure, oh, we can take Israel and crunch them. The Secretary General of the Arab League at that time, Azam Pasha, makes a famous statement. He said, oh, we're going to go into Palestine, it's going to make the Crusades and the Mongol massacres look like a joke. We're going to kill everybody. By the way, the grandson of Azam Pasha is today the head of Al-Qaeda, Ayman Zawahiri. That's his big yichus over there. So the point is, well, the Arabs know this. We don't know who families are, but they know. Now, mind you, now, therefore, Abdullah meets with Golda Meir again and says, I know we made a deal like this last time, but circumstances have changed, and I can't ignore what the Arab world expects from me. And anyway, I got the power to do it, and so I'm taking the whole thing. Now, I advise the Jews to cooperate with me, so basically allow me to occupy you in some sense, and we'll have a joint state in the sense, no, there'll be an Arab state, and the Jews will have civil rights in that state, because you know me, he says, I'm not one of these crazy Arabs. He really was. For an Arab, he was very liberal for an Arab. In other words, the Jews will be second-class citizens, but they'll be treated decently. And that's what he promises. And so he's totally delusional. By the way, this is only part of his plan. The next part of the plan is he plans to also add Syria and Lebanon. Okay? Now, I showed you last week that Syria it's not such a crazy idea. Syria is really divided into different groups. So he figures that he can, divide and conquer all those groups, many of which will be on his side anyway. And so he's had a grand scheme to realize the Hashemite dream back in Lawrence of Arabia's time of a big Arab kingdom, and the Jews to just be a piece of it. His army is about 5,000 men. He's nuts. You understand? The Arab Legion was, I'm sure many of you know, because you look like a knowledgeable audience in some degree, that all right, you don't look like a knowledgeable one, but the point is, they were trained by the British and trained very well, but it's very small. The British weren't stupid. They're not going to make a big Arab army. It was good like for a police force or something like this. And, very well disciplined. It's the only Arab group in the 48 war that doesn't massacre Jewish POWs. When they take over the old city, as we'll see next week or whatever, it was bad, but they did not kill the civilians. Some of you were with me on a trip or two. We went to Israel a couple years ago. I forget the fellow's name, in Shalvim, where there was a guy telling he was one of the people from the old city, and he was kept as a POW by the Jordanians in 48, 49. It was not easy conditions, but they weren't killed, and eventually they were returned back to Israel. So I'm just saying, they are very well disciplined, but 5,000 men, you can't do too much. But he doesn't see it that way. The Jews also have no weapons, at least up to November of 47. The day after this, Ben Gurion says, we got to move. I mean, look at that. It's very small. This is the total of what the Jews had. 10,000, I got to get used to how to use this. There's really not a lot, right there, right? Even if you add what the Stern Gang has. So, it was also delusional. I already spoke about the fact that in 1945, 46, 47, when it was possible to get a lot of weapons from the surplus from World War II, the Jews didn't do it. Now that the partition plan is in there and it looks possibly like the British might get out, Ben Gurion wakes up and he says, we have to move and move now. We have to get ready for May 15th, and we have to have an army, and we have to have the weapons for an army, and it's got to go. And he sends two of his guys over there, two of his, what shall I say, better smugglers. Well, that's what it was. This is how the Zionist movement succeeded, or didn't. This guy was from Lithuanian Jew, makes Aliyah in the 1920s. The Haganah tells him, join the British police. He joined the British police, have one of their guys in there. He's actually, Yehuda Razi, he's actually there when Arlozorov is murdered in 1934, that famous political murder. He says it's not the Irgun guy that did it. We'll come back to that next week. And the Haganah says, no, go along with saying that they did do it. He kind of gets fired over there. He moves to Poland. Once he's in Poland, he hooks up with the Polish government to smuggle weapons into Palestine. And in the Second World War, he drives a truck on the battlefield of El Alamein after the fighting is over. He's a smart fellow. You know, all the British and the Germans are dead all over the place. What does he do with the truck? You understand? So no, he's a clever guy. So Ben Gurion said, I guess you go, and after the Second World War was over, Ben Gurion sent him to America and to Europe, different place. He made the TAS, the weapons industry, to buy factories, little things to make Sten guns and bullets and all that kind of business. But this guy, who was a big macher in the Aliyah Bet, you know what that is? They're the ones who made the Ha'apala to smuggle the Jews through the British blockade. What kind of skills do you need to be successful at this kind of things? It's not the skills that you need for yeshiva bacher, you understand? It's a different set of skills. And you have to know and move around the European countries. I'm sure you'll be shocked to hear that once in a while they have to bribe somebody. It's the way business is done. And so Ben Gurion says, you go to Europe and find the weapons. And he does. Eventually ends up in Prague. It's a long story. I wish I had the time on these talks, but I don't, to go into details. It's taken me long enough just to cover the hazy outlines. Isn't it amazing? But Ehud Avriel, Iberho, a German Jew, will make the right connection. You go to Paris, which leads you to here, that leads you to there, eventually ends up in Prague. And basically the Czechs, again, I know you'll be shocked to hear this, they say, if you have cash, you can buy anything. Okay? And he does. Okay? Now, how do you get the money? It's nice to find the places, but nothing works if you don't get the money. This is the finest hour of Golda Meir. She flies to America and raises $50 million. Once upon a time, just going to Beth Tefillah, going to the Hadassah thing, that's it. Going to the ZOA, running around the country and making speeches and passing the hat. That is what happens. Raise $50 million, and let me tell you something. When the state of Israel is declared after May 15th, and they're broke, she will fly again and raise another 50. This is quite a task. And I'm talking about a time long ago when $50 million was money. Right? So Israel starts out with 100 million. Now you have what to talk about. If these guys run anywhere, they have letter of credit, they have cash. This is how it happened. It's as simple as that. So it's the old story. Kesef menolan kicha kicha misteyefron, as they say in Hebrew. By this time, the battle between the Jews and the Arabs is a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag. The situation in Yerushalayim was really desperate. We talked about the convoys that couldn't get through, and every time the Jews try to do something, it works and it doesn't work. At the end of the day, the Arabs are controlling the high places. You can't really get around that. Maybe the Palmach lost a lot of people just trying to open up for a day or two to get a few trucks in and a few trucks out. It doesn't work. Also, there were many kibbutzim, especially in the Galil in the north, the eastern part of the Galilee, which were, the reality was that the Jews bought whatever land they could and put a kibbutz there in the 30s, early 40s. So here's a kibbutz or a moshav, and all around us, dozens of Arab villages. It's the way it is. And so, as 1948 proceeds, they're getting choked off. I mean, you can't survive if you're just besieged and can't get anything through. Ben Gurion and his generals are there in January, February, March, and they're going crazy. And finally, they decide, look, if you're losing a game, change the rules. Right? If you can't win, change the rules. The way we're fighting now isn't working. We got to come up with something different. And so what they end up doing is the general staff, especially Yigal Yadin, who was like 31, 32 years old, a young fellow at that time, he will become the head, Ben Gurion's number one guy in the army when he has the fights with the other generals. Ben Gurion, Yigal Yadin, who went to Hopkins, by the way, Very interesting relationship because they argue all the time. But Ben Gurion said like this: he only argues and criticizes me to my face. He doesn't talk behind my back. That's a big virtue. That's it. But it is. If you agree with me, say you agree with me. You don't agree with me, say you don't agree with me. But then when it's over, it's over. And you're not going back. What's better? That you should agree with me to my face and then talk behind the back? It's very interesting. And he comes up with, as I say before, something on Plan Dalet. There was Tachnit Aleph, Tachnit Bet, Tachnit Gimel, now Tachnit Dalet, Plan Dalet. And Plan Dalet, basically, I want you to look closely at this map if you can. You can see the different colors there, right? And you see the difference between this color and this color. And you see that the area originally allotted to Israel, everything you see over here was given by the United Nations to Israel, part of partition. But even in that, look how much it was Arab. I told you the other time that the original partition plan was deeply flawed. Just the Jews took it because the best deal on the table. There was the only possible deal. But in the original partition plan, as you can kind of see over here, 400,000 Arabs. So it was 650,000 Jews, approximately, and 400,000 Arabs. So there are huge areas within the future projected Medinat Israel, even if there will be peace, which there wasn't, which are going to be totally Arab. So, look at the kibbutzim over here and the whole Arab areas surrounding them. You get what I'm saying? And it's hostile. And we know that the Arabs are not going along with the partition plan, and they say, we want to take down the Jews. And so there's basically a desperate situation. And so Yigal Yadin and Ben Gurion say, listen, we have to conquer our own territory, basically. You know what I'm saying? We have to conquer our own territory. And it may come to it, we have to kick the Arabs out of our own territory. Right? If that's what it is. At least that's what it's going to develop into. Which is why today, if you know anything about political correctness, to talk about Plan Dalet is like a big thing on the anti-Zionist, pro-Palestinian speaker circuit. Like they say, this is a plan to carry out ethnic cleansing and this and that and the other and all that. And it isn't. It's not happening in a vacuum. The Arab League guy said, we're going to make a massacre that's going to make the Crusades look like a joke. The Jews are on the ropes. On the other hand, they say, now we're taking off the gloves. We're going to fight hardball. And the plan is crush the Palestinians in the territory assigned to Israel, destroy the villages, and kill or expel the Arabs from these areas, making it safe for the Jews. That's a fact. Now, they didn't have a fully worked out plan to go after each and every area, and sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. But overall, they did. So when you go to Israel today and you see the Jewish areas, and I'll speak about this a little bit later, you get off the plane and you're in Tel Aviv and all this kind of stuff. It wasn't all Jewish areas, all around Tel Aviv. I repeat again, around Tel Aviv and Kal V'chomer, the other places, were dozens of Arab places and villages. But in the course of Tachnit Dalet, Plan Dalet, the Haganah and the Palmach, in this occasion or that occasion, went after this place and destroyed it and kicked the people out or shot them or something like that. Perfect example of what I'm talking about. Used to be a time, right? Tel Aviv to Lod, you know what I'm talking about. How long is it from Tel Aviv to the airport? It's not long. You couldn't drive. In November, December, January, February, March, you couldn't drive from Tel Aviv to Lod. Every time Ben Gurion or Moshe Sharet or somebody, listen to this, had to go to America or anywhere else, they took a plane from Tel Aviv. Remember, there's a little airport in Tel Aviv? There's a plane from Tel Aviv to Lod to take a plane. Because in the middle was Yehudia, which is, despite the name, is an Arab village, which was real Mufti territory, Abdul Qadir al-Saini. It was murderous, and you couldn't get a bus through there. You understand? It is what it is. There were some other villages, but that one was particularly bad. And I'll tell you again, Moshe Sharet is constantly taking a plane. It's crazy. A plane from Tel Aviv to the airport, and then from the airport elsewhere, David Horowitz and all these other guys. Now, the Haganah says, look, it's the heck with that. We're taking down Yehudia, and they do, and they attack it, and they destroy the place. Pretty much they expel the inhabitants, or however, I don't know exactly how it happened. And now you can drive through from over there, from Tel Aviv, at least to the airport, not to Lod. Lod is an Arab city. But you can at least to the airport, to stay too far. Yafo, next door to Tel Aviv, you all know that. It's a basic threat to Tel Aviv, 80,000 Arabs. That's a big population who are shooting, and if you paid attention when I talked about last week, are actually attacking Hatikva and other areas in Tel Aviv. That's who they are. And so what are you going to do about all that? Yerushalayim. How are you going to get there with all the problems of being shot at from the people on the top. Take the top. Attack the villages on the top, destroy them or occupy them or something like that, and then you're going to be able to get the convoys through to bring the trucks with the necessities for the besieged Jews of Jerusalem. What choice is there? You can stay on the top and we have to drive always through them. We're not going to do that anymore. Now, this involves, as I say before, a certain amount of ethnic cleansing. That's a fact. What are we supposed to do? Surrender? Give in? This will be successful, as we'll see. The Jews will actually, in the period I'm talking about, although they will lose it later, seize these hills in bloody battles, and they'll even seize strategic places in Yerushalayim. It's one of the what-ifs that in April and early May, if they wanted to, they could have taken the old city of Jerusalem. But Ben-Gurion did not want to let them do it. Ma Yomer HaGoyim. He said, since it's Christian quarter, he's afraid what might happen because the Haganah soldiers were not well disciplined, or if the Irgun gets in there or something, if they do something wrong to a church, or whatever, some kind of atrocity, which happens in this period, he was scared to death. What will the Christian world do? We got enough trouble that the Muslim world is against us. We don't need that the Americans and the Europeans should do it as well. And so the Haganah refrains from seizing the old city, even though I'll tell you right now, the Palestinians, as we call them today, are on the ropes during these during this 6 weeks prior to 1945. So it's a very, very complex situation. The main battle that starts in the beginning of April under this new program is what's called Operation Nachshon, Niftzah Nachshon, Nachshon ben Aminadov. First one in, first you into the water of the Red Sea, So this is going to be pioneering. They're going to jump, the Palmach have to jump right in the middle of the Arabs. That's what it is. And here's where we have all the battles for these villages that control the heights, that are on high places. The most famous, of course, I'm sure you know, is the Castel. Many of this people know this story, which is the site of an old castle, of course. And that's where the village will exchange hands back and forth. The Palmach will take it, the Arabs will counterattack back and forth. And in the course of that fighting, of course, the leading Arab commander, Abdul Qadir al-Husseini, gets killed by accident, and they freak out. But they retake the village again, and then the Palmach retakes it. I forget how many times it went back and forth. In the end, it was held by the Jews, but not really, as we'll see. At least temporarily, for April and early May, the Jews are controlling the heights. They seize those villages, and you get the convoys through. What happens is that there's just not enough soldiers. The Palmach is undermanned, and they're a fire brigade. Wherever there's a problem, the Ben-Gurion and Yadin, they rush them there, and then when that's over, they rush them here. And they don't have enough people to hold the territory that was taken, you see? And so it's very sad. They'll capture all these villages like Castel, and then oops, I don't know what I did. But then they'll end up having to withdraw the troops, and the Arabs will come right back in. And the siege of Jerusalem will resume, simply because the Jews don't have their act together as a country with a draft, with large numbers of soldiers. That they will later on. The big tragedies from the Jewish point of view, as far as I'm concerned, in the 48 war is that this will all be in place later in 48, but we needed it at the beginning of 48. But of course, you can't control it. Everything will fall into place later in 48. But at the time it counted, if you're talking about long-term gains over what we call the Green Line, if we had it a little bit earlier, if we had the men and the manpower, if. Okay. So in the specific case I'm talking about, the Castel is finally captured, but then eventually the Arabs are attacking Mishmar HaEmek, which is in between Haifa and Jenin, up north, and they need the reinforcements over there. This is when the Palmach really loses so many men rushing from place to place. They weren't handled very well, but they're very courageous. And this was, as I say before, a heavy price in blood that they pay. All this is happening in the first 2 weeks of April. First 2 weeks of April. It's exactly at this time when the Palmach and Haganah are taking the villages and trying to break through over here. So the Irgun says, well, let's us take something and try to help them break through on the other side. That's Deir Yassin, the famous massacre that people know about. To me, it's always funny that if I say Deir Yassin, everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about. This is really happening all the time. It's the media. I don't mean this in a bad way. The historians, the public, they need a specific thing to focus on. You need a face. But it's the Arabs are doing to the Jews are doing to the Arabs. At the moment, I'm talking about in April and May, the Jews were doing a better job than the Arabs were, that's all. But both sides are trying to each other. The Irgun, it's April 9th, they take Deir Yassin. 120, 130 Arabs are killed in it, men, women, and children, mostly men. The argument is that the Irgun, of course, says it was all done in hot blood. They're shooting at us, we're shooting back. They claim it was done in cold blood. After it was killed, and after everybody surrendered, then they shot a bunch of people. Who knows? It is true that the tactics that were evolving, especially in the part of the Irgun, was the Russian tactics, which are not dumb, but they're pretty hardball. If somebody's shooting me in the house, I blow up the house. Then they're not shooting me in the house anymore, you understand? Instead of doing like you see in the movies that they run here and they run there and they're shooting here and the machine gun nest, like when I was a kid, all the movies of the GIs and the Germans, they do the Soviet style, which is, none of that. Blow up the house. Throw, 10,000 pieces of dynamite on them, and that's the end of that. So guess what happens? A lot of civilians get killed along the way. It's hard to tell exactly what happened, and it will never really be solved. But I can tell you that if Deir Yassin is an iconic face for the world, it was even more iconic face for the Arabs. Here we deal with something very funny, but very real, and that is cultural differences between groups. War, of course, is among other things a funny thing. Jews, till this day, are freaked out in Israel. There's terrified Arabs using knives. That's why the Arabs, when they carry out killings, they like to use, there's something about that. Now, it doesn't matter if you kill somebody with a knife or with a gun, but culturally it does. Arabs are freaked out by Jews raping Arab women. This is in their culture. This is the way it goes. It's the ultimate dishonor and all that sort of thing. And now, we're dealing with culture here, you understand? Not with cold, rational thinking. The rumors will spread, true or false. They may have been true, they may have been false. I wasn't there. And there was killing on both sides. There was looting and arson and torture and rape on both sides. Okay, that's a fact. In the 48 war, that's what happened. I don't know how much, where, when, but this did happen. The fact that this story gets out, that the Jews not only shot people but raped the women, spreads all over the Arab part of Palestine and drives them nuts, scared. They don't say, let's go fight the Jews. They say, let's get out of here. I have a family, I have daughters, I have wives, I have this, that, and the other. We're out of here. And they flee. And so the Deir Yassin battle and the massacre, whatever happens after it, has a huge ripple effect, which is negative for the Arabs in the 48 war. It's quite remarkable. The Arabs charged the Irgun, as I said before, with rape, but the news spreads everywhere, and you know how rumors pick up as you tell them along the way, and this will cause panic and flight. Let's take a look at this is an Arab spokesman.
This was our biggest mistake. We did not realize how our people would react. As soon as they heard that women had been raped at Deir Yassin, Palestinians fled in terror. They ran away from all our villages. In the next few months, over half the Arab population, 750,000 people, fled their homes in Palestine. Israel never allowed them back.
And this is not exactly correct. It's not 750,000 people, and they didn't flee Palestine. Some did, but many will go, as the majority of the refugees of the 48 war will go, 10 miles east. You understand? Those who are from Israel will know exactly what I'm talking about, especially if you remember before the 67 war or anything like that. Here was Kfar Saba, here's Kalkilia. In other words, the refugee camps are in the West Bank, primarily, not all. But they will run away from the Jews. That's the key point. They will run away from Jews because of this terror, as he himself said. He's a Nusayba, he's a famous Palestinian guy. Now, on the other hand, the Arabs will take their revenge or 2 days later, April 9, 4 days after Deir Yassin, you have that famous terrible story of the convoy traveling through Yerushalayim to Mount Scopus with the doctors and the nurses on the 4 buses, and they'll be attacked by the Arabs, and they will not, and the British will stand by, because the British are angry at the Jews also for Deir Yassin. You see? I know the British are tzaddikim, but nevertheless, this is what happens, and they'll let them get shot up, and these buses will eventually be attacked. They're armored buses, so the Arabs can't get in, so they pour gasoline in them, and they burn the buses, and everybody gets roasted to a crisp. All the doctors and nurses who were on their way to the hospital. But, you did it to me, I did it to you. And there's that cycle of violence that I was speaking about on the last, a lecture. This brings us to the middle of April. 4 weeks to go from April 15th to May 15th. It is during these 4 weeks the Jews go on the real offensive in Palestine to conquer the cities with the mixed population. In other words, Lud has no Jews. Gaza has no Jews. Jenin, Tulkarem, Nablus, and all these places has no Jews. But Haifa does, Jews and Arabs. Tzfat does, Jews and Arabs. Tiberia did. Yaffo is an all-Arab city right next to Tel Aviv, so it's not exactly a mixed population, but you understand what I'm saying. They're cheek by jowl. And so, what do you do about this? If there's going to be a Medinat Yisrael, and they're going to have all this in them, it's going to be, let's put it this way, a 5th column. So that they're afraid that on May 15th, when the invasion comes, and it's going to come, and it did, they're going to join the Arabs, and we'll have, people with a knife against our back, and not only fighting a knife in the front. The famous problem of the 5th column. And so they go on a full-scale offensive to go after those 4 cities, and the military facts on the ground, which I just told you, are going to dictate, at least they'll be convinced that they're going to dictate, what I would call hinterland clearing operations, which means if this is Haifa, if it's all big Arab population, the Arabs will invade from Lebanon and from Syria, we got to make it that Haifa is secure in terms of the Arabs in it and in the many villages surrounding it, otherwise they're going to join the invasion and make it impossible for us to survive. In these 4 weeks, the Jews go wild. In the past, the Arabs had carried out all these pogroms historically against helpless Jews. This time, the military advantage is with the Jews. And the Jews of Tiberia, for example, go on the offensive I'm talking about with the Palmach and the Haganah on the Arabs. They do a pogrom on them, to be perfectly honest, and the Arabs totally flee. The Jews loot and pillage everything over there. They came in boats. It's a very ugly business, such as war. Next, they went after Haifa, which is 80,000 Arabs. That's a big population. But already by November 30th, the Arabs in Haifa were scared, and as we saw last time, what happens in December, January, February, March in mixed city like Haifa? A throws bombs in B neighborhood, B throws bombs in A neighborhood. They put a bomb in the Jewish supermarket, they're going to whoever puts a bomb in the Arab supermarket, and so life becomes unbearable for both sides. But the Jews had this ruach at that time in which we're sticking this out. The Arabs do not have that ruach, this spirit, and every time one of these terrorist car bombs or whatever goes off, a bunch of people flee. And so over the course of these months itself, the Arabs freak out and start to leave. The Jews do not. Half the population of the Arabs had left already by the beginning of April. In the second 2 weeks of April, the Haganah, under a plan, attacks the Arab neighborhoods in Haifa. The object there was to take control of the neighborhoods, but not to expel the Arabs. It's very interesting. For a variety of reasons, too complex to go into here, the Jewish leaders in Haifa wanted the Arabs to stay, and but they wanted to control the area. The Arabs kept suing for a truce. The Haganah refused the truce. They said, we want to surrender. And as they said that, they kept bombing the Arab sector. After a while, the Arabs are not successful in hitting the Jews. It's only the other way around. And so the Arabs in Haifa psychologically become terrified. But what they're primarily terrified is not of the Jews, although they're scared of that, obviously. They're scared of the Mufti and the Arab nationalists who will accuse them of being quislings and traitors to the Arab cause. And they say, if you do surrender, it means you're agreeing to live under the Haganah. We're going to mark your families down for elimination. That's more scary to them than anything else. Once again, the toxic politics of the Mufti was massively counterproductive. It's like he was working almost for the Haganah. You understand? And so you see that when the time comes when the Arabs will send a surrender delegation, the Jews and the British especially, will say, stay, stay, stay. And the Arabs will say, we cannot stay. We're all leaving. And we'll be back one day when you guys are defeated. You see, but we cannot acknowledge, your existence. And we'll get on a ship or a car and go north to Lebanon or some other place like that, to Akko and whatever. And this let's get out of here mentality is, of course, aggravated by Deir Yassin. These guys are okay. Who knows what kind of Jews are going to show up tomorrow? Mayom. And so the result is 90% of the Arabs, it's a viral panic, 90% of the Arabs, maybe more than 90, flee Haifa. Just as Israel is about to become a state, this is prior to May 15th, obviously, everything I'm talking about, the late April, early May. And they figure the Syrian army will be here in a few weeks and we'll go back home. In fact, we'll get the Jewish homes, you see. So this is the origin, as far as I'm aware, of the stories we all heard when we were kids, which is your own leaders told you to leave and all the rest of it. It's not exactly, as far as I can see, that the leaders told them to leave, but they gave them these kinds of choices that if you stay and you agree to cooperate with the Jews, which you have to do if you're surrendering, then you'll be traitors to the cause. And that combined, as I said before, with the fears of Deir Yassin type repeats is what caused, as far as I can tell, this panic, which definitely sweeps the Arab sector. The British try to talk very strongly to the Arabs to stay. None of it's all to no avail. And so Tiberia was totally taken by the Jews. Not one Arab left. I repeat, not one Arab stayed in Tiberia. Haifa, from 80,000, it's down to something like 4,000. This is what you're talking about over here. And meanwhile, they say, Kinasov from Tarba Chachma, people get jealous about it, they want to outdo them. The Irgun gets jealous, Menachem Begin, of the fact that the Palmach Haganah are having all these successes, all the rest of it, and he wants to show very much, Menachem Begin, in these years, that the Irgun is not a terrorist group, and it's not what they called in Israel a gangs, I forget the word for it, a chuliot or something, and it's an army, it's a government ready to take over the state. This is the Jabotinsky myth that it's an alternative to the existing institutions. And anyway, we can conquer a city too, and hand it over to the Jewish people. Yaffo, big city, but tough. It's not like Haifa. It's not half and half. The Haganah had stayed away from Yaffo. Maybe they figured they'll choke them off at some later date. In April, Begin gets the Irgun together, and he says, this time we're not going to have, a bombing here or a shooting there. We're going to have a battle in which we're going to conquer a city. As Begin puts it, we're going to do Yaffo, and I'm not talking about the oranges. And he points the head of the Irgun. This is Amichai Paglin, who was a guy who had originally worked in Shomer Tzair, and then his brother was betrayed by the British in the Second World War, got killed in some boating accident, which the British caused by negligence, and he becomes anti-British and joins the Irgun. Each guy here has a fantastic personal story, and he's their most talented guy, and he's their military talented commander, and he organized the Irgun to attack Yaffo. So here we're not talking about huge battles in the classic sense. A bunch of guys go show up in one area, at 6 o'clock in the morning in Tel Aviv, and say, attack that way. And that's what they do. And the Irgun guys are going crazy, and I told you, they fight like Stalingrad, which is blow up every house on the way to shoot at you. And so basically, they blow one house up, and then another house, and another house, and the next thing you know, you got a whole urban renewal going on over there, fighting your way through the center. And I mean, if the Arabs have 2 machine guns, this one would have a controlled field of fire. When you blow this one up, you blow this one up, all of a sudden you don't have a controlled field of fire. This is the rough stuff that's going over there. Both sides, of course, play very rough, but the Irgun has no hesitation in sending mortar shells and all this kind of stuff all into the Arab neighborhoods, which, of course, freak out the Arabs, as I say, and cause a major panic in Yaffo. And second of all, who is fighting here? Mamish the Irgun, in other words, really the Deir Yassin guys, I mean, whatever. And so they're really terrified about this. And so, once again, there begins a whole process, which takes a couple weeks, during all the fighting in which the Yaffo kind of disappears in the Arab city. From 80,000, it's going to end up with like, again, 4,000, 2,000, 3,000. It's not so simple because the British see this, and it's not quite before Israel become a state, as you know and I know. And the British hate the Irgun anyway, and they don't like what's going on here in terms of ethnic cleansing. And the whole machlokes in the British government who was tottering on what to do, should they intervene over here. And I can tell you right now, the two top British generals, Montgomery says, oh, it's the Irgun, wipe them out. They're sending the RAF and sending the tanks and shoot them all. If you kill a couple extra Jews, the hell with it, you know? Let's show it, and show what England is like. This guy's the last high commissioner. He said, we've had enough trouble. It's like Obama, we are getting out of here. You understand? We are not, that's exactly the parallel, right? We are getting out of Iraq. We're getting out of Palestine, he says. This is the high commissioner, and basically his attitude is like this: these people are going to kill each other in the next 10,000 years, so England should not get involved, and they don't. So even though he was the chief of the general staff and he gave the orders that they should attack the Irgun, it didn't happen because of him. Not because he liked them, but because, as I say before, he wanted to get out of over there. It's a confused situation because Ben Gurion and Haganah don't like this. It's a private war that nobody authorized. On the other hand, it's an objective fact that this huge territory right next to Tel Aviv is going down, and a veldt of Arabs are fleeing over there. By the time you get to May 15th, the battle will still be raging. It stopped and started, and the Haganah will take over, and they will eventually complete the expelling of most of the Arabs. After May 15th, May 20th, and those areas from Yaffo, because listen, Tel Aviv is the heart of the state. If you're going to have a large Arab population area, which is so hostile and so lethal, and they were, this is going to be impossible. They're going to have a gigantic fifth column, and Israel doesn't want that. So you see, generally speaking, over and over again, what's happening during these weeks, this remarkable period of April and early May of 48. Pesach this year, of 1940, was April 23. During the Irgun urban fighting in Yaffo, the Haganah says like this: what about all those dozens of Arab villages and towns that I told you before, like Yehudia and all these other places that used to dot the countryside outside Yerushalayim? Let me put it this way: the Haganah launches something called Mivtza Chametz. Chametz. They're not talking about Bedikas Chametz, they're talking about beer Chametz. I'm serious. You understand? And they're talking about making Tel Aviv, which is going to be the heart of the new state, the heart of Jewish Palestine, which it remains today. Right? The majority of Israel's population, I don't say it's wise, but it's a fact, is the greater Tel Aviv area. True, taking in a lot of places right around Tel Aviv, but you've been in Israel, you know that. They want to make the place, as Yigael Yadin says, we want to make it Pesach dik. You understand? There's no chametz. And so, in real language, it means destructions of villages, expulsions, shooting, the whole thing. So, again, everybody's concentrating all the brutal fighting going on in Yaffo, but there's plenty of it going all around there. This is the way it goes. Those Arabs who had started on November 30th, day after the UN vote, shooting recklessly and relentlessly from Yaffo into Tel Aviv when they had no plan of how to do this, they proved to be unbelievably stupid, because they really brought upon themselves a total destruction. You see, but that's who they were. You know, they operated, as I said before, without a plan. So by the beginning of May, 2 weeks to go, before the British pull out totally, the Jews were not doing too bad. They eliminated, so to speak, Haifa and Yaffo, the two biggest Arab communities in their rear. Also Tiberia. Tiberia lies on the route. See over here. Here's the map, of course. You understand what I'm talking about. All the operations I've been speaking about take place within the area assigned to Israel. But the area assigned to Israel was one in which it was a hefkeris, there was a civil war raging, A was shooting at B and vice versa, and this was simply an organized plan Dalet, to totally conquer these areas, either take control of the Arab areas within it, or else kick them out. And the same thing was, now you're going to have up here. When they took Tiberia, the idea was, we better take this because Syria is going to come in, and Tiberia is the main Jewish place over here in the southern part where I'm pointing right now. If it's going to be a large Arab area in there, then they'll join the Arabs in their invasion, the Syrians, and we'll be in trouble. We'll get wiped out. And so they completely expelled the Arabs from Tiberia and the surrounding villages. What about the rest of the Galil? I mean here, the northern part, right? You see what I'm talking about? Now mind you, this is assigned to the Arab state. This was not originally supposed to be part of the state of Israel, nor was this, of course. It was areas, and they didn't even touch, did they? They had a funny looking map, but the truth of the matter is the UN guys were sympathetic to the Zionists and drew the map in such a way that at least you took in wherever the kibbutzim and the moshavim or moshavot and things like that were. So it reflected that rather than kind of territorial logic. So what's going to happen with the northern part over here, especially this part, which is like the finger, Metula to the Kinneret, which is really sandwiched in geographically even today between what? Lebanon on one side, Syria on the other. I think that's a good picture. I'm talking about this area. If you live in Kiryat Shmona, here is Lebanon, here is Syria. Now, at the moment, this is the Golan Heights, so Israel occupied in 67, they haven't left. But this was Syria, true, until 67. So if you live in Metula or Kiryat Shmona, you got guts, because they're on both sides. And at that time, this area was full of Arab villages. That's what it was. Okay? This whole area is full of Arab villages. Azay. So, Arab communities. The center, of course, the main Jewish population place is Tzfat. As you can see over there. There's Tiberia, and north is Tzfat. Tzfat was a majority Arabs and minority Jews. Famous week, I repeat, a week, Jewish community. A lot of pogroms in the past. The Mufti already said this is going to be the capital of the Palestinian state until they take Jerusalem. Guess what fate lies ahead for the Jews of Tzfat if the Mufti makes it the capital after May 15th of the Arab state. We all understand there. And if you know anything at all about the history of Tzfat, they have a long history of being killed and raped and so forth by the Arabs repeatedly, also the 1800s and even into early 1900s. It is what it is. And so it's not surprising, although it's a little delusional, but people, as you see here, and perhaps it's part of the human condition, are often delusional about many things. The Frum Jews, and there are many Frum Jews in Tzfat, want to negotiate a surrender to the Arabs to save lives. Now, I'll say again, that was delusional, but I understand, I understand the way they felt. And they said, we're going to get shechted over here. The Israeli leaders, especially this guy, said this is not going to happen. Yigal Allon was the commander of the Palmach, and he's from this area. He's from the northern Galilee, and he said there were not going to be any kind of surrender, and we're going to win him. And you guys don't make a move. His mother, well, it's very interesting, his mother, who died young, was from a Frum family in Tzfat. His father wasn't religious, but his mother was born in a very religious family in Tzfat. And so he understood totally the mentality, and he understands why they want to be that way. But he is the head of the Palmach, and he was Israel's most gifted general by far in the 48 war. He's the number one Israeli commander. The others were far inferior to him. And he's a very charismatic guy. And he said like this, you're not surrendering, and this place is not going down, and you leave it to me. You leave it to our guys, and we'll make it happen. It's not going to be easy, but it will happen. You don't have our perspective. It's April, May of 48. We're winning, not them. Don't give in to these guys. They're actually, militarily makes no sense. Now you're just a from Jews who's afraid of the Arabs down the street. I understand that. But actually, we have the power. They don't have the power. It was just an interesting kind of colloquy that was going on over there. And I'll say again, it was about 30 years old, 31 years old. Very charismatic. It's an interesting person. He had no career later in Israel because Ben Gurion hated him. He was jealous of him because of his popularity. But it's very interesting. He had it's rare in history. He had this quiet charisma. You understand? When he went into the battlefield, he just, I think we should do this, and they all did it. He didn't make no speeches or anything like that. His guys would follow him through fire and water. He was the author of the indirect attack because when he was a kid, he already saw the frontal attacks. Your men get wiped out. If you do indirect attacks, you get your objective without losing so many men. Believe me, every time in the 48 war that this was not adhered to, the Jews lost a lot of men. Eventually, they lose 6,500 in this whole period I'm talking about, which was 1% of the population. But I would say easily half of those guys did not have to die. They did through stupid frontal attacks, which Ben Gurion often insisted upon, because he was thinking with that World War I mentality, which was stupid. And he was a talented guy, and he said that's not the way to go. So it's, from a military point of view, it's very interesting. This is the period of the Palmach mystique. The Palmach was 5,000 altogether. Was about 5,000 boys and girls, young people, and very socialist. Oh my goodness. Basically, You have to understand, the period we're talking about is when the left-wing Zionist parties, what will later be called the Mapam, they viewed themselves as communists in everything but Zionism. And they regarded the communist disapproval of Zionism as simply a misunderstanding. We haven't broken through to them yet. It's a tragic misunderstanding. Stalin really should love us. You say, now again, they're delusional. He says, Stalin really should love us, and you should read their literature. Some of our Chaverim are in Soviet prison camps, but this is due to a tragic misunderstanding. We're sure tomorrow or the day after, they'll understand that really we love them and let us go. The Palmach's main songs are the Red Army songs. They have a Red Army mystique. They thought they fought the Germans and beat them, which they did. And before that, even, it was a people's army. And so it's ironic. They keep up all the shtick of the Red Army before Stalin changed it back to a regular army. So the officers don't have any kind of special uniforms, and everybody's supposed to eat together, and all the shtick that goes along with socialism. Everybody's chaver, and all the rest of it. But it worked. You understand? And I'll say this much. I forget which battle. It was one of these battles over here, but they didn't just talk. It was Ramat Yochanan or one of those places where the Arabs are attacking and the Palmach is outnumbered, and so he gives a famous order, which is the soldiers will retreat, the officers will stay behind to cover the soldiers. You see, which is the opposite of what usually happens. Okay? And the idea is, yes, I give you orders, and sometimes I tell you to die, but I'm willing to do it too. It's just very interesting. So he says we're going to do it, and he attacks Tzfat indirectly. Takes the villages around it. That's the way to do it. And he's up two in this one and the other one. And then he takes, there's a lot of fighting. He takes specific spots within the Arab neighborhoods. This one and this one and this one, once again, which are strategically located. There's a lot of house-to-house fighting. It's a bloody business. But they don't just do like they're going, go whole hog against everything and blow everything up. It's done with a system. And the Syrians, and after all, how far is, you can see in the map here, how far is Tzfat from the Syrian border? It's right there, correct? Today, again, I repeat, it's under Israel because it's still part of the Golan Heights that we hold, but it was Syria. So the Syrians are going crazy. They figured Tzfat will be the capital of the Syrian headquarters and all the rest of it, so they send reinforcements. But what kind of reinforcement? They send junk. They take people off the street. The Palmach, it's a very famous, the Palmach captured an Arab over here coming from Syria. Why did they get you? They took me off the streets, and they said, if you go and fight the Jews, we'll give you 30 pounds money and a white woman. If this is your soldier material, this is not exactly what you call highly trained individuals and all the rest of it, and therefore they were beaten. The Arab mayor flees. In Turkey, they say the fish starts stinking from the head, and so the mayor flees, the city council flees, and what's the regular people do? They all flee. And by the time the battle is over, which is just before May 14th or so, all the Arabs, without exception, flee Tzfat. The Jews take over the town, and only till recently, only very recently, very controversially, the Arabs returned to Haifa. I keep saying it, to Tzfat. It's an all-Jewish city, and they kept it that way, for until really a year or two ago, or something like that. And so really, it was mostly the other way around. A short time before, the Jews in Tzfat were so afraid that they were willing to surrender. And then within a week or 10 days or less, there are no Arabs, period. And not only that, Alon, who grew up with Arabs, he's not from a kibbutz, although he joins one when he becomes a young man. He converts to socialism. His father was a regular farmer who hates that kind of business. He was a farmer, poor, in the Galil, near, not far from here, around there. And they had a very poor, he never had a pair of shoes till he was like 15 years old. Really tough. And so he grew up with Arabs, fighting Arabs, dancing with them. And so it's ironic. So he knows the Arabs. So he says, there's no way they'll tolerate the Jews. And so he says, if we've taken Haifa, that what we're going to do is we're going to get the Arabs all the heck out of here. And so he now launches a whole sweep of dozens of Arab villages over here, just before May 14th, 48, right after they take all this area, and the Palmach goes after one village after another, and they burn the place down, and they chase everybody to Jordan, which is very nearby, right? I mean, it's a few miles away. No. Oh, I'm sorry. So they said they go down to here then, yeah. Actually, they ended up in Jordan. But you're right. Let me say this. There were many villages, because he knew the Arabs. There were many villages composed of Arab tribes which had immigrated to Palestine 50 years before and something like that, 60 years before, from Jordan area. Again, we are not really knowledgeable of the Arab culture. But if you are a little bit, it's all clans and families. So you're not an Arab, you're somebody from somebody's family, or Shevet. And they can really know, within their society, roughly speaking, where you come from and what your clan is and where they were and where they moved to and back and forth. And so basically he says, you guys go back to where you were before because it'll be better than it's going to be over here. You're not going to be under the Jews. And one way or another, they chase everybody out to the nearby areas. I can tell you, around here is if you know the Tanakh at all, around here, I forget exactly where, is Mount Gilboa, where Shalom El, where King Saul was killed. And if you read the Tanakh, you read the Bible, you'll see that when he was killed on Mount Gilboa, it says the Israelites could see it on the other side of the Jordan. You know, many people over here could witness it. So, you know the terrain up there, we're not talking about really being far away. And anyway, this is what happens. And so, by May 15th, the hinterland of the Eastern Galilee, this whole area that I've been looking at back and forth, the Eastern Galilee, which was the part that was assigned to Israel, right? Remember? That was the part assigned to Israel, has pretty much, what can I say? Pretty much been secured because the Arabs have been expelled. Wait a second, yeah. This whole area, in April and May, I would even go so far as to say between April 15th and May 15th, was the Arabs were kicked out. This is what happened. Now, Western Galilee is a different story. This was assigned to the Arabs in this area of huge Arab villages and population, and very few Jews, hardly any, and that's why it was assigned to the Arabs. So when May 15th happens next week, or in 2 weeks, and there will be an invasion by the Arabs, there'll be a big nafkamina, be a big difference between the Jewish situation here and the Jewish situation there, which basically doesn't exist. And all these details are not details to the Israeli generals, correct? These are the basic facts of life with which they have to understand. Now, looking back, it's a ruthless policy that I've described tonight. But on the other hand, the Jews would not have been able to withstand the Syrian invasion. And so either kick at the Arabs or they would get killed. And that's how they saw it, and I think that they were correct. So if we make a sikum klali, if we make a general conclusion over here, I would say the 6 weeks before Israel became a state witnessed the Palestinian Arab collapse. That's what happened. They collapsed. Their military power was destroyed, and the population was expelled one way or another. That is one of the main reasons why the Arab states will enter on May 15th. It's not the only reason, but it's a big reason. From their point of view, they're not coming in to be invaders, they're coming in literally to be rescuers and liberators. And when the Jordanian Arab Legion will come in here, as we'll see next time, everywhere the villagers will come out and say, praise be Allah and God bless you for coming rescue us for the Jews. And you can understand what they feel like, okay? The Syrians will feel the same way over here, and the Egyptians, Egypt until May 12th, 13th, says they're not going in, but at the last minute they say we can't abandon them. So it's a mixture, you understand? They also want to take a piece of land, they also want to do this, they want to get involved in the Arab politics, but the bottom line is that they didn't want the Jews to take over the whole of Palestine and make it Pesachdik. The way things looked, if you're an Arab looking at May 14th, May 15th, 1948, the Arabs are on the run, the Jews are in the pursuit, the Jews have taken all the Jewish areas, and there was nothing military that could stop the Jews from taking over all Palestine, right? Basically, if it was just the Arabs, the Palestinians by themselves, they can't hold Jerusalem, they can't hold the West Bank, they can't even hold Gaza. You understand what I'm saying? This was the reality. Now, the funny part, you'll see in a minute, because Meanwhile, a major political battle during all this period was raging far away from Israel, in Washington, D.C. and in New York, where the United Nations was. I might say when this all started out, in December, January, February, March, the general feeling is the Jews are going to suffer a pogrom. But that simply means that the State Department guys didn't know what's going on. It's going to be the other way around, isn't it? It's going to be the other way around. It's also true that during these months, as we'll see a little bit later, little by little, the weapons are starting to come through. Not in large quantities, but in little quantities, and the Palmach and Haganah is of such a thing that every time a couple of rifles come in, they can do another battle. I mean, that's how it worked. The State Department, the United States State Department, smarting from Truman's intervention in favor of the partition in November, and we saw that a couple weeks ago, where the United States was supposed to oppose partition, then Truman turned on a dime and favored it. In good bureaucratic style, is now focusing on undoing the partition vote. These are the decision makers, Secretary Marshall, of course, and the Undersecretary Robert Lovett, a very famous person in American history, and Lloyd Henderson was the career diplomat. These guys are working overtime in the best fashion. Okay, you won the partition vote, but that's now. Tomorrow we can undo the partition vote. You see? The president got us last time, but we can get him another time. Now, they're not stupid. I've told you that before. These were very intelligent people, and they made a good argument. They say, listen, the partition is unworkable and impracticable. Unworkable and impracticable. Look, partition assumed that the two states would coexist, and instead they've gone to war. This is a fact. The Zionists, in order to get something, were so desperate, they said, let's have a partition, and let's have two states to coexist one by one. And they meant it if the Arabs would change, but they weren't stupid. They also knew that the Arabs are led by the Mufti, and they're going to change. But they talked that talk in order to get the United Nations to vote for partition bichlal, correct? To get it there. The State Department says, but it's a mirage. If you could really get, and they meant it, if you could really get the Arab leaders and the Jewish leaders to agree to some kind of a partition and the two states should coexist and work together economically or otherwise, all right. But since it's not happening, it means the entire basis upon which the United Nations voted for a partition in the first place, the entire basis upon which the commission, the UNSCOP, came up with the proposal to have two states was unrealistic. We never voted, the world never voted, to have a Jewish state that will be fighting the Arabs. The whole point was to have something peaceful in there. So if it's not peaceful, we should go back to the drawing board. It's getting worse all the time. Look at the massacres in January, February, March, and all that. And after April, look at the massacres the Jews are doing on the Arabs and the expulsions they're carrying out. It will only work if a large United Nations army enters Palestine and the U.S. doesn't want to send troops any more than Obama wants to send troops back to Iraq tomorrow. One thing that Truman was clear about, and one thing you had unanimity in the American public was no soldiers to the Holy Land. Okay, that's all we need. By the way, can you imagine what would have happened? Instead, the alternative that the State Department proposes, I mean, what is the alternative? The British are leaving. Now, they would like if the British would say they're staying. But what if the British don't say they're staying? Believe me, Lloyd Henderson over there will meet with the British ambassador in these months repeatedly to say, please, please, pretty please, can I persuade the British to stay? And, you know, the ambassador says, but you the guys that were backing the Zionists and the Irgun and all that, and you won't join us, and, you know, we've had it. And so, what do? If you're not going to have partition, and you're not going to have the British staying, you got to come up with something. And so, trusteeship, they dreamed that one up, which is a variation on the Morrison-Grady plan. And really what it boils down to is they hope the British will stay to enforce it. This is an exercise in poli-sci. There'll be a governor general appointed by the United Nations. He will appoint a commission, and they'll set up elections in the whole of Palestine to have two houses, a Senate and a House of Representatives. They'll also have a judiciary. You understand what I'm saying? They're crazy. In the middle of March and April and everything I've been describing to you, they're going to have one of these Thomas Jefferson exercises over here. And the two sides, of course, will agree to go along. It begs the question that if you're going to have democratic elections, obviously the Arabs instantly win. True? Because there are more Arabs in Palestine than Jews. These are Did I? You went off. Hope I didn't do anything. Hello? 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 There's nothing you can do. Howard?
Could it be that this is
Somebody's-
not my fault?
No.
We'll say this for the
Hold
outtake
on,
reel,
somebody's
right?
coming, somebody's coming. Let's take a look at it. 1 second. I don't want to have to shout, but I will if necessary. I don't even think I hit it. Would be anything connected with this? Albino, can you hear me? No, but I mean, it gets recorded?
Actually, the sound is
What do I have to do? Take your mic off, he says. Just when it was getting interesting.
Going in overtime.
Here. That doesn't work either. What's that? Camera microphone is fine? All right, I'll try my luck. And I guess we're recording it here. All right, let's put it this way. So, we're talking about trusteeship, which is an interesting word that they came up with. And that would mean the end of Israel. That's my point. And they knew this perfectly well, but that's the way they wanted to do it. Now, the Zionists, of course, under Avihl Silver, freak out. It goes without saying. And that's all we need. Can you imagine? I don't even have to take you back in time. Can you imagine today the United Nations in charge of Palestine? I rest my case. So, now Truman, during this period, after November 30th, after the UN vote, was pushed very hard by General Marshall, by the Secretary of State, whom he venerates and he needs. Truman's facing an election. I might say he regarded Marshall, as you always call this, the greatest living American, understandably, and he didn't want to clash with him. On the other hand, his heart and his politics, as we'll see, was pushed in a different direction. So what do you do? It's a battle of the head versus the heart. Which way is it going to go? I don't have to tell you what this guy's doing during that time like that. They're really going ballistic, and the parades and the protest meetings and the, flooding the White House with telegrams and all this kind of business, and all the political leaders, and it's an election year. You can just imagine what's going on over there. And basically, the State Department faces a big obstacle. They thought they had it worked out bureaucratically, and if it was a bureaucratic battle, they would have won. But it's a democracy battle, and they faced a big obstacle because it's an election year, and Truman was unpopular, but he was determined to run. So being the president, he controlled the Democratic Party machinery. He's going to get the nomination. What can I tell you? I'm sure you all know that Truman had an upset victory, but as 1948 commenced, early in 48, the country was all of the opinion Truman is a terrible president, and he's not going to win. Here is some of the most famous, popular statements at that time. All right? Right? And this is what it was. And he very much needs the Jewish vote in order to win. No Democrat ever wins without New York, although interestingly, when Truman does win in November, he doesn't carry New York. Well, because Governor Dewey was the Republican candidate. Dewey was a popular governor in New York. It's just interesting about that. Hooray. What was wrong with it, battery? Okay, so it wasn't me. The eternal cry of the married man. Now, equally, and I think more importantly, Truman needs money. People don't. Let's put it this way: he can't get it from the regular Democratic Party money bags because they think he's a loser, and you're not going to throw money down the drain for nothing. Truman's money troubles become particularly acute as the year goes on. I'm going to show you a clip that I found from a Hollywood movie about Truman. Maybe some of you saw it, made 10, 15 years ago. This is a dramatization, but it's based on a real story, as you're going to see. That during the Whistle Stop campaign, now you all know what I'm talking about, that Truman ran across the country after election, Labor Day, in September and October, delivering his message to the people, and eventually got through, and that's why he won, and all the rest of it. Running a train costs money. Is that a fact or not? Take a look at this. Oh, this is the end of it.
Roosevelt never had a big like this. Roosevelt was a great man.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we had the whole clip. Well, if you saw it, you'd see that the train stopped during Whistle Stop campaign because the money ran out, and the engineer says we're not going anywhere, and he had to pass the hat around in the movie and get some cash in order to pay the engine driver to run the train. That's a major biziona. That's why he said before this wouldn't happen to Roosevelt because Roosevelt was a great man. He literally had to pass the hat around. Now that's not exactly true. That's a little bit of Hollywood in it, and I can imagine why they did it. Because what really happened was he was absolutely desperate for the money, and Abe Feinberg to the rescue. Because this guy, when all the Democrats said we're not giving a penny, he got up at a meeting. He said, "I'm giving $100,000. I'll raise it from my friends," and he did do it. And when he said that, then Lewis Johnson said, "Oh, I agree to take over the campaign committee, campaign chairmanship," and the other guy, Howard McGrath, I'll do the finance chairmanship. And really, what happens is this is one of those wonderful stories that, thank God, don't get into the history books so often. During Truman's Whistle Stop campaign in 1948, every time he stopped there, he gave a speech. And some of the local officials would come on board, the mayor and this and that and the other, shake hands and take pictures with him, all the rest of it. And almost every stop, some of the local Jews would come on board and they shake hands with the president and give him campaign donations. You understand? And above and beyond the original thing. I remember many years ago, Gore Vidal said that John F. Kennedy told him when he was running for president in 1960, he said, Truman, a guy got on board and gave him $2 million. Now that's not exactly true. But in the conglomerate of it, this is how he survived the campaign and to get his message across. And it's nothing I said is illegal, correct? Everything I said is perfectly legal. It's not like anything was going on, especially in those days. But but these are the facts of life. This trumped the State Department. Let's put it this way. And these are existential political realities facing Truman in 1948. It is what it is. Clark Clifford. His lawyer is counsel, I guess you'd say, in the White House. Clark Clifford draws up a plan with David Niles. He was the Jewish guy. These two guys draw up a plan in January of 1948 how Truman can win. And they plot it out very coldly. They say you got to put together Roosevelt's coalition. You have to have the black voters, you have to have the Jewish voters, you have to have the Catholic voters, the labor unions, this and that and the other. The South eventually in 1948 will break away from Truman because he's in favor of civil rights. So usually Roosevelt always ran with the Southern votes. And the strong liberals are going to vote for Henry Wallace. It was running to the left of Truman. They siphoned off a lot of votes over there. In spite of all this, they say you can win it. But all I'm trying to tell you is keep this in mind as we raise ourselves the question of Truman dealing with the question of partition or trusteeship. And as the year proceeds more and more, Truman wants to feel that he's following a sound national policy, which the State Department tells him all the time that he's not doing. Under Marshall's prodding, Truman says, okay, we'll favor a temporary, I said temporary, emphasize the temporary trusteeship until we work this all out. I'm sure it'll all work out for the Jews in the end. The Jews go crazy, obviously. Abihail Silver again goes ballistic. And Truman desperately wants Marshall to agree with him. And he arranges a famous meeting with the president, with Marshall and Clifford, where Clifford makes the case for partition, and Marshall blew up. It's a very famous story, which Clifford here is telling over in his old age. Clark Clifford went on to become a famous, super wealthy Washington lawyer.
The U.S. State Department argued against it. Their first response was, no country, no state.
Ben-Gurion sent his close colleague Moshe Sharett to convince the Americans to recognize the proposed Jewish state. Sharett tried to persuade Secretary of State George Marshall, who was totally opposed to the idea.
Sharett explained that we have no other way than to proceed. This is a historic juncture. If we miss that, we may create tragedy for future generations.
But President Truman surprised everyone with his strong support.
I was told by all these so-called experts that it was done. It involved the whole Near East in a war, and it would also involve the United States. Hitler had been murdering Jews right and left. I saw it, and I dream about it even to this day. The Jews needed someplace where they could go. It was my attitude that the American government couldn't stand idly by while the victims of Hitler's madness were not allowed to build new lives.
Marshall was worried that war would break out.
We are in the midst of a very critical situation. We should therefore carefully avoid approaching international problems on an emotional basis.
He wanted to maintain good relations with the Arabs.
I was on the receiving end of Azam Pasha's impressions of his meeting with Marshall. And he was happy. I mean, he felt much more reassured about the Americans after having talked to Marshall than before. And we had the Saudis with us. They were our partners in this visit.
2 days before the British left Palestine, Truman summoned Marshall to the White House. Clark Clifford was asked to support the case for a Jewish state.
General Marshall started off. The president listened attentively and then said, I would like now to hear from Clark. But as I spoke, I saw Marshall's face getting redder and redder. When I finished, he exploded.
Marshall accused Truman of a transparent dodge to win the Jewish vote.
Clark Clifford did not disguise the fact that Marshall was a raging man. They didn't need a state, they don't deserve a state, it isn't theirs. They've stolen that land. These were Marshall's words.
He turned to the president, said, I'm obliged, Mr. President, to tell you that if you should adopt the policy that is recommended by Clifford, I would be unable to vote for you in this coming election in November. Well, dead silence in the room. No one had ever heard anything like that. I had never heard anybody threaten the President of the United States in that manner.
Before Marshall could go any further, Truman ended the meeting.
I gathered my papers together, and the President said, well, that was tough as a cob.
So, as I said before, do you really need fiction? All right, let me wind down. Truman can't afford to alienate Marshall, not in 1948. The State Department is convinced that Truman will do the right thing and support the trusteeship and an end to the bloodshed and violence, although how exactly anybody plans in light of what I've been telling was really going on in Israel, nobody knows. I might add that during this time, this is Gromyko's finest hour. The Soviet Union stands like a rock in favor of partition. The Zionists and the Soviets were buddy-buddies. They were both united and very strongly. Gromyko has famous speeches where he says, do not back off from partition. This is just the State Department kissing up to the Arab sheiks and to the British and all that sort of thing. And it's the strong support of the Soviet bloc that played a major role in eventually persuading Truman not to listen to the State Department, if you want to get down to it. Finally, as we saw a couple weeks ago, Eddie Jacobson, who's here with Weizmann, Weizmann calls up Eddie Jacobson, Eddie, like that. He says, we need you to, get me in. And I'm not going to repeat that clip again, but as you know, even though Truman said he won't see me, but he eventually gets him to see him, and Weizmann does his magic. He gets Truman to agree, yes, we'll support partition, we won't go with trusteeship, and he'll even give Israel the Negev. Here, as you see, this is after Israel became a state. Weizmann visited the White House and gave Truman a Sefer Torah, and Truman responded with that famous line, I've always wanted one of these, 2 days after the meeting that Weizmann has with Truman, 2 days after this meeting, the State Department announces that the American policy is switched from partition to trusteeship, which is the exact opposite of what Truman assured Weizmann. Truman, in his diary and afterwards, was very, very angry over all this. He's incensed, which turned out to be good for the Jews, because he said like this, the State Department got me, and I intend to get them. That's what he says over there. And he will get the State Department at the first suitable opportunity, because I can tell you right now, when May 14th happens and Ben-Gurion proclaims the State of Israel, 6 o'clock American time, Truman, without consulting the State Department, announces that the U.S. recognizes Israel, which leads to what is generally regarded as one of the most embarrassing moments ever in American diplomacy, because Philip Jessup and Francis Sayre, the U.S. representatives to the General Assembly, are delivering speeches at that very moment in the United Nations saying that the U.S. policy is firmly in favor of trusteeship and opposed to the partition, when the Secretary General of the United Nations hands him a little message, over there, that Truman just recognized Israel, and Jessup, I think they have an clip somewhere, I'll see if I can get it, says, I'm awaiting further instructions. You understand? Which really is embarrassing for the diplomats, but that was Truman's way of saying, you embarrass me, I embarrass you. You understand? So life is interesting in that particular regard. What can I tell you? The United Nations, the State Department are viewing things in a different light than Ben-Gurion. To them, the worst thing in the world is violence. That's what they say. All these are to end the battle. Not that they would. Ben-Gurion, the worst thing in the world is not violence. Not in April and May of 48. The worst thing in the world is not violence. Not at all. On the contrary, the only thing that Ben-Gurion is worried about is the Arab invasion, which he knows is a week or two away, Arab armies. Meanwhile, Ehud Avril is in Prague, rounding up and shipping off the weapons. Israel had, and this is the last story I'll conclude with tonight, Israel has a problem. How do you get the weapons from Prague, which is all the way deep in Europe, to Palestine? You can't, it's too far to fly. And the answer comes up, something very interesting. I think I may have mentioned it once in the past. There's a Jew, Shai Kadan, over here, a Romanian Jew over here, who, a Romanian boy, he makes aliyah in the 30s. He works as stevedore in Haifa. He becomes something in the Mossad or something like that. And he jumped with Chana Senesh, you know what I'm talking about, in the Holocaust into Hungary, Romania. She went into Hungary, he went into Romania, and of course none of them could rescue the Jews. She got caught and killed by the Germans. I'm sure everyone knows what I'm talking about. He doesn't get caught. The Romanian Jews have to hide him. It's funny. He's supposed to come to help them, but they obviously don't know the situation. And the Romanian Jews hide him in the back of a mikveh. It's a whole story. He's not religious at all. And when the war's over, he's in Romania, and he immediately, this They used to have people like this, totally 110% dedicated to Tzionut in the sense of bringing Jews to Eretz Yisrael. That's what he lives for. And he's in Romania, it's the Balkans, and so he immediately organizes illegal boats to go to Palestine. It becomes a big machar and all this sort of thing. He's going to the whole Balkans, which is Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, all the rest of it. This is exactly at the time when Stalin and Tito are taking over this whole part of the world. He's a Zionist. Here's this guy crossing the borders back and forth and bribing people. Who is he? He gets arrested by Tito's police, right? In Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia is rough. Even today, you know, the fighting with Croatia and Kosovo and all this kind of stuff. And Tito's secret police. You understand? There's nothing left of you by the time they finish, literally. And he is hauled in front of the general of the secret police. He says, who are you, working for the British or something like this? And, we're going to get it out of you one way or another. So come clean. And he said, the heck with it, he's going to come clean. He's like, I'm not working for the British. I don't give a damn. He said, for Stalin or for anybody else. I'm working for the Jews. The Yugoslavians, you know what happened to the Jews. The Serbian Jews were also part of the Holocaust. And I want to get them to Israel. I don't care about anybody else. You wanted me to tell you the truth, now you can shoot me. That's who I am. And it's a very remarkable story. The head of the communist secret police says, thinks there for a minute or two. He says, I believe you. And he takes out of his drawer, and he gives them a thing. He signs it, and he says, this is a diplomatic passport. With this, you can go anywhere in Europe, and nobody will bother you. And I will give you full support to help the Jews. I agree with what you're doing. And as a result of this, he can go to Romania, he can go to Bulgaria, to Albania, to Yugoslavia, all over the communist countries, and he does for the next several years to organize illegal, immigration into Israel. As soon as Israel become a state, he'll go right away to Bulgaria. He pay the right people off, and the whole pub out of 50,000 or so, 48,000 will just get on a boat and go right away to Tel Aviv. It's the first Aliyah after the state. He's quite a guy, and he has all these connections with Yugoslavia, as you see. And he goes to the secret police, and he says like this: we need you to give us an airfield and all this to get the weapons from Czechoslovakia to Israel. And they said, we'll do it. It's interesting. We'll do it. And so life is strange, and that means the weapons are coming through. But there's one big political problem, and that is the Zionist party. This is going to freak you out. The Zionist parties, most of them, are opposed to declaring independence. In May of 1945. You say, what?